Okay, well, here's our plan, is that I would like for us to be able to talk a little bit about some of the theologies of the cross. So if you were here last week, you had a real treat, that's what I would say. The bishop mentioned that there are 7 Orthodox theories of the atonement, even though we tend to only focus on one. So Rob Puckett asked me, can we talk about the other ones? And the answer is yes. What you're going to see is that there's a lot, quite honestly, that is, there's a lot of reverberations as we go through the 7. I mean, to be honest with you, there's really more like 3 that are just like more or less nuanced. Most of us we're going to find are familiar with many of them, but maybe don't know them by name. And that's okay. Please, if you have at any point, when I'm on share screen like we are right now, I can't always see all of you. I'm going to do my best to see as many of you as I can. So don't hesitate to like say, hey, I've got a question or a comment. You can put it in chat, and normally I get like a message that there's something in chat. Maybe it's helpful to hear though, and Tim had this really good idea, is maybe let's mention what atonement is. Here I've got, give me 1 second. I guess Meg didn't get the link, so let me send it to Meg. And Janet, the link. Okay, let me give you a definition of atonement that comes right out of the dictionary, if that's okay. Normally, when we use the word atonement, we're talking about reparation for sin. Reparation. It is like in the sense of payback, leveling scales that have been tipped through some action or through state of being. This can also mean something like reconciliation, which presumes that there's been a breach in relationship. Okay. Now, again, there's a presumption there that something has been, that something's happened that has sort of hurt the bridge between God and human beings. And it's maybe helpful to say, if you know any of your like Renaissance Enlightenment people, that there's sort of like 3 traditional views in the Western civilization for human beings. Thomas Hobbes, right, who says people are inherently evil and bad. John Locke, who says people are the blank slate, the tabula rasa. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who says people are basically good. And so we all make decisions about kind of what we believe, but what's important to hear is sometimes we have the Hobbesian perspective. And by the way, that's in the book Leviathan that Hobbes wrote, where you can find that. Has anybody read Leviathan? Yeah, I haven't either. But that's a good summary from my English teacher. That again, people basically have a Leviathan in them that is in the language of the 28th prayer book. There is no good in us. Would be that theory. So sometimes the way we approach it is going to be determined by what we bring to it. In fact, probably that's always the case. Whether or not we're morally neutral or morally fallen, to use the non-Christian and non-Jewish phrase that only really showed up with St. Augustine, right? So 400 years after Jesus was this idea that was swept into Christianity of a fall with a capital F. It's not biblical at all, but it has influenced the way we hear the scriptures. Some people are going to say, hey, look, because people are not fallen, people are basically good. And so as a result, it's not an atonement that's happening. It's same letters spaced out. It's an at-one-ment where God becomes one with human beings, if that makes sense. And we'll see that when we get toward the end of what I've put together. I don't know how I lost these other folks, but I've lost 2 or 3 people. So that's see me clicking in and out. I'm just going to do the best I can. Okay, the first and oldest theory of the atonement was written by this guy called Irenaeus of Lyon. Maybe you've heard of him before. He is what we call one of the like the early fathers of the church. And he was extremely influential in helping do things like theology of the Eucharist and how people should be baptized and in what conditions. And so these are called the patristics, because these are like the early church fathers. It's a strange phrase because somehow we don't have any matristics, church mothers, which is really odd, but that's the state of being. And I just wanted to share with you this particular scripture. So what Irenaeus came up with is this idea called recapitulation. That is that like Jesus somehow represented, and it's really funny because we're going to hear this and we're going to like, you're going to think like, oh, this implies that there's like a fall and then there's to be a reset. But Irenaeus didn't believe in a fundamental fall. He didn't believe that human beings were terribly awful or anything like that. This is just like a refresh button. So actually, whether you're a Hobbes person or a Locke person or a Rousseau person, recapitulation is really just about like a new creation. And I think it's really helpful to think if you're a Lockean or if you're a Rousseau person, you realize that there are these forces that exist in the world that are like systemic, diabolical, and these usually are the words ism, like racism, sexism. So it's not like any child is going to be born without having that effect on them. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that people are fundamentally bad. It means that there's these social structures that tend to warp and strip the dignity of creatures of God. And so this theology Irenaeus developed was really like Jesus is the new Adam. Like, hey, here's a new restart. And here's the scripture he uses out of Romans. Summary statement is, hey, one guy, Adam, created a trajectory wherein there were systemic problems. So one guy, Jesus, is going to offer a new way that can deconstruct those systems so that people can live into their fundamental goodness. I hope that makes sense. But the Jewish view is that people, in fact, are fundamentally good, not neutral. Jewish view is people are good. In fact, you can read this when you read the rabbis. The rabbis say, look, in other religions, people make things like idols, and God has resisted idols always because idols cannot speak or hear or think. And so the rabbinic view is we're made in God's image, like human beings are idols of God because we can listen.
What problem? Oh, okay.
Okay, so I don't know if you realize this, and I want to give you a picture of this here. In the icon that Kara painted, in fact, there's this understanding in recapitulation theory that when Jesus was crucified at Golgotha, the place of the skull, if you look down here at the arrow, there's that skull and crossbones, and that's meant to be Adam's bones in the iconic tradition. So Jesus was crucified on the side of the original Adam, and he's going to be the new, sort of the new human being. You've got to really resist the desire to think about fallenness here, because again, that's not happening with Irenaeus. You can hear this other idea from Athanasius. He's the one who really defended the Nicene Creed. He says that God became human so that humans could become gods. And that's the word apotheosis. In fact, if you've ever been to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., there's a big painting, The Apotheosis of George Washington. where George Washington becomes a deity. I don't know if you've seen that. It's huge. It's like 4 stories tall. I mean, it's so big. So really, Jesus is fulfilling human potential, and it's not just illustrative. It really is transformative. Adam was disobedient at a tree, the tree of knowledge. Jesus is obedient to death on a tree, which is the cross. Irenaeus also said that Mary is the new Eve, because she says, as your servant, I'm willing. Let me pause. This is number 1. This is the oldest one that's been written out. Is this new to anybody? The word recapitulation might be new.
Yes.
Okay. This is an idea that not that Jesus is like a moral example, but that he's somehow changing a structure. Now, Irenaeus doesn't quite say what's in the way of us being able to do this without Jesus, but he does seem to think there's like an obstacle to human beings being able to get out of systemic sin, and that somehow Jesus has removed that obstacle. Again, it's really hard to hear this and not think of the word fallenness or evil or no good, but Irenaeus didn't have that in mind. That comes later. So this is idea number 1. The next one, I'm going to move on, but please don't let me go too fast. The next idea is a word called ransom theory. And this comes right out of the scriptures, right? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. For freedom, Christ has set us free. So we've been freed as if we were captives. Therefore, don't submit to a yoke of slavery. And then again, you'll see there's one mediator who gave himself a ransom for all. This idea came from Origen of Alexandria. Alexandria at the time was like the most advanced city, like the Silicon Valley of the world. Origen was actually later declared a heretic. In fact, when he was young, they were martyring Christians in Alexandria, and he went out to get martyred, but his mom grabbed him and was like, no, honey, you're not today. He, in order to like walk more faithfully, he ultimately castrated himself so that he would no longer be concerned with licentiousness. You're going to hear this and you're going to say, oh, yeah, look, this is God paying a ransom like to evil or to the devil. But Origen didn't have in mind a diabolical being opposed to God. Origen had in mind that this is an image of the lengths God would go. Now, I've seen this terrible Christian t-shirt that says, I asked God how much you love me, and God said this much. And the hands are spread out and Jesus is on the cross. That can be a little bit yucky, but that's a little bit of the idea. The lengths God would go would be to pay a ransom at a high cost for somebody who loves. Now, if you get real detail oriented and you start to combine it, you say, well, who is God paying the ransom to? And how did that person come into possession? Those are not the things that Origen had in mind. Those are the things that come later, like what are we enslaved to? And how did that happen? That wasn't around in the original ransom theory. Again, this is really just like an image that links that God will go. I hope that makes sense. And maybe it's good to park here just for a second, right? And say that original sin, as we understand it with a capital O, showed up really in the writings of St. Augustine of Hippo. And St. Augustine wasn't a bad guy or anything. He was just trying to make sense of the world. St. Augustine said, if you haven't heard this before, this is literally in the writings, that human beings are basically selfish. And if you want proof, look at babies. All they ever do is cry when they want something. it's because they're selfish. Now, I don't think Augustine realized it's because like humans have evolved to need taking care of. He looked at it as selfishness. And so Augustine said, basically, babies are born selfish, and he tried to reason backwards, like, how can that be? And his theory was that when human beings in the garden ate the apple, that their fundamental nature changed and fell. And that's with a capital F. So if you've heard of the fall, and by the way, my Bible, which is an NIV study Bible, it has like a segment that says the fall when you read Genesis chapter 3. The translator put that there. It's not in the text. That word fall is a Neoplatonic idea. That is, it doesn't come from Plato. It comes from a revival of Platonic thought. And just to give you an idea, Augustine was a Neoplatonist before he became a Christian. And his understanding was, once upon a time, the universe was really good and ethereal and spiritual and infinite. And then there was this evil being called the demiurge that went about making matter, like stuff. And stuff is bad because it's a prison for the ethereal, infinite, eternal soul. Bodies are bad, spirits are good. By the way, we still this is like a cornerstone in Western tradition, sadly. Spirit good, body bad. Augustine said that happened really in the garden. When Adam disobeyed, he committed the original sin. And you can read this. This is going to sound nuts, but he said Adam's sperm shriveled. That is, like, it used to be really good, and then it became fallen. And this is Augustine clearly believing that procreation is a male thing, not a female thing. And therefore, there's like a sin gene. Now, you know, the human genome's been mapped and we haven't found it. Doesn't matter. I suppose it doesn't show up in the microscope according to Augustine's idea, but this is the deal. And it got pushed so much that if you've heard of the Immaculate Conception, have you heard of the Immaculate Conception? That's not Jesus, that's Mary. The doctrine was that Mary could not have had original sin, or she would have been an improper vessel for the Lord. So what happened was, when Mary's mother became pregnant, her name's Saint Anne, God restored her father's sperm to the way it was supposed to be. So Mary was born without original sin, which allowed her to be a fit vessel for the Lord. Or that just didn't happen. There's options, but this is where some of this comes from, right? And so as that develops, Ransom's theory starts to change, so that now people are born sort of in the Hobbesian perspective. People are born evil. They're born captive to evil. Adam started it, and we need a release. And the only way we can release is either by ransom, like paying a price, or by substitution, like somebody has to get the punishment. Somebody has to. And so this is when things start to morph out a little bit more, is with Augustine. Now, again, Augustine wasn't a bad guy, but he was part of a Neoplatonic cult. And he also was in part of a group called the Manichaeans, who believed the body was bad. And therefore, the way that you could help the spirit was by depriving the body. Like, suffering in the body purified the spirit. This is how most people approach Lent. I'm going to show God how much I love God by making myself miserable. Let me pause at ransom theory. Has anybody heard ransom theory before?
Absolutely.
You've heard it. Good. Again, it's going to get into the ugly, ugly bit I mentioned about powers and devils when we get to Christus Victor, and that'll come in 3 more theories. I don't want to be so didactic. Do you have questions about these things, or things you appreciate about them, or things that you're like, ooh, like that's not really how I do this, or that's not great?
I do have some questions, Mike,
Mhm.
or just some thoughts and comments. In an odd way, there is some comfort in this theory, in that when I recognize that I am not God and that I'm not perfect, but that I can be redeemed with God, by seeking God, that I become aware of His majesty and ability to help my life. Now, that I also recognize is kind of immature. So, comments about that?
I don't need to comment. I think you just made a comment. I think that's helpful.
Well, I have one. First of all, I definitely do not agree with Augustine. And I don't believe that children are born in original sin. They come directly from God, so they have to be in a state of purity. I understand that Augustine was a man of his time, and, they were back in ancient times and they were still having to figure things out. But I feel like the church has done, the patriarchal church has done us a real disservice by emphasizing the fact, Augustine's teachings. But Augustine and I disagree on several things. That's just one of them.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And by the way, I think it's really worth holding up. Augustine was probably one of the most influential, bishops in the church, kind of like ever. And the guy created a whole bunch of meta theories. And when you make a meta theory, there's always going to be a problem with it, right? There's always going to be an exception. And some of the things he wrote are really great. It's just that this one's tough. This one in particular is real tough.
And I think we need to change it. I mean, I don't know whether we get in trouble with the church or something like that, but it's time that we had some liberation in that area.
I think I can say, like, compassionately, where I think there's some sticking power here. And I think it depends where you are in the Enneagram, or like your core spiritual filters or experience. But to me, Augustine makes a lot of sense. If you've ever had the thought like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. If you've ever had that thought, Augustine's response is, there is something wrong with you and you can fix it. And, I actually find that is like a really core experience in most people I know. The idea that there's something wrong with me. In the church I grew up in, which is a mix of ransom and penal substitution, which we'll get to in just a second, the answer is there is something wrong with you and Jesus can fix it. And, I think that was so attractive. I just wanted to be fixed by the Lord. The problem was, no matter how strong my evangelical faith was, I just never got fixed. I mean, that was the problem, is I got this promise of fix, but it didn't seem to really happen. Instead, there's a different frame, right? Which is like, hey, maybe there is nothing wrong with you. Maybe there's nothing wrong with you, except that you think there's something wrong with you. That's an interesting bit.
I really agree with that, Mike. I agree that there's kind of two sides to that coin, and that's what I meant by sometimes I feel like that this theory or transactional theory about this is somewhat immature, because on the flip side of what you just said, it's like the possibility is that there is nothing wrong with me. I am okay right here, right now, in God's universe with you and everybody here, that this is okay. This is fine. And when I focus on the goodness, then maybe there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity to approach this from a social justice lens and say, like, well, there may not be something wrong with you or with me, but there are these forces in the world, and I believe this. They're superhuman forces because no individual can change them. They exist. And those are forces like classism, ageism, tribalism. Where I came from in Coronado, they hated when I would say this, but nationalism is terrible. It's awful. Patriotism pretty much anytime you put ism at the end of a word, it's going to be real negative. Oh, but what about optimism? Optimists, they don't see things the way they really are. This, like this is the critique of optimists, right? So, so these kinds of forces, I think, are the ones that probably we do need to be unshackled from. But that doesn't mean our own dignities. I want to talk out of both sides of my mouth, right? Because there are these forces that are tough and they're real, and we see them being borne out in the world. And in some ways, we are captive to them. And I think that's where this has some sticking power. Now, if you go all the way with it and you say, yes, and therefore people are totally bad, we've probably gone further than Origen or Irenaeus wanted us to go. I think really what they're trying to say is there are supernatural forces in the world that we need liberation from. And I actually could agree with that.
And I would add to that as human beings, we make mistakes because we don't always know the right answer, or maybe we have wrong intentions, but by the grace of God, we can overcome it. And I agree with you too about those isms. We're really in a bad spot with that, and all of it comes from the fact that humanity's been a negative thinker of focusing on how bad we are, and etc.
Yeah, thank you. Tim, I saw your hand.
Is the early ones before St. Augustine, they seem to be a little existential.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And of course, existentialism isn't a word that we really used before the 1800s. Right. But as a concept, yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's really important, Tim, that, like the Christian concern with heaven and hell when you die was not original to Jesus. Like that was not the number one concern for folks back then. The concern when you hear eternal life in the Gospel of John, it means like this life. How do you live this life as big as you can, not heaven when you die? It can mean both things. I'm just really positive from really any biblical scholar you read that eternal life in John is about your best life now, to use that phrase. Okay, any other comments, or shall we move forward?
I was trying to put some in the chat, but just to add to the issue of the isms, when I engage in an ism, what I'm really doing is saying how I am so different and or better than something else. So I, to get to the goodness of things is the recognition that I am absolutely no better, no worse. I am, and you're no better, no worse. Mm-hmm. Just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I think it's fair to point out, by the way, that the U.S. Constitution, and again, I'm not a nationalist, although I'm grateful I live here among all the places in the world, right? But the U.S. Constitution actually kind of believes in the fundamental dignity of all human beings, theoretically, because you all get a trial by a jury of your peers. Even if we caught you in the act. That's a right that you get a jury trial. And in that sense, right, the Constitution holds out. Everybody gets this. Lila, were you getting ready to hop in?
Me and Julia put in the chat.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I can see the chat. In screen share, I'm having trouble seeing the chat.
I'll just read it to you.
Oh, please.
So I'm saying, I think I grew up believing that redemption was part of God's grace and the cross was what bad people do to good people in the world. So for me, that's always left the cross in a weird place. And then my second question is, does recapitulation include the idea that Jesus had to die for God's justice? And then Julia has a comment as well.
I don't think Irenaeus would push, I don't think Irenaeus would have pushed recapitulation that far. God's justice wasn't like his primary concern. His primary concern, as I understand Irenaeus, was how can we be new creations, which is what Paul talks about, right? In Christ, we're all a new creation. And I think what's happened over time is we decided to approach that with a lens of justice. And you'll see why when we get to the next slide.
Okay.
Julia, I think probably that's really, really fair. And the idea of fixing through suffering is problematic. I think that's right. I do think I think what's tough, right, as the parent of a couple of kids, is I see growth comes with growth pains. And so I think probably suffering is introduced because, frankly, trying to adopt a new way of life or a new discipline requires some suffering. In the best sense, it's when I pick to do it. And I think the tough bit is when I say, you have to do it, or you're going to do it because it's good for you either way, right? That I think is the problematic piece, but I think maybe it's not problematic to say that, like, whether it's a plant or a human body or a habit, you know, there's just growing pains.
Yeah, I think, sorry. Yeah, I should qualify, I guess, the idea of required suffering is what's really problematic for me.
I think it's problematic.
It's just
It is. Yeah, and I don't think that's just because I'm a modern person or I'm like a, whatever you want to call me, like a snowflake or something like that, because I'm not, I don't think I'm those things. I don't think so. But I know that for me, like, hey, I found that I had high cholesterol. I changed my diet completely. Would I call that suffering? I mean, I just did it. It's like sort of okay, but I had to give up stuff, and I chose that. I chose it so that I could live a longer life, you know, like there was something in it for me, but it was a choice I made that had consequences, you know, and I think anytime we're going to choose a new habit or we're going to reach outside of ourselves to invite or to welcome or connect, you know, that takes discipline because it's not habitual to us. But like you say, when you say you must do it, that's when it starts to become problematic because now you're taking people's will away from them.
Well, you know, back in the early church, there was that strong emphasis on suffering with Jesus but anyway, the thing is, and I've been thinking about suffering some lately, not that I'm suffering, but, you know, suffering comes just through living life. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we're encouraged to take up our cross, it means that we carry, that is a form of a cross. And it might be light and it might be heavy because we have those moments in life when we do it. And so what the redeeming part of that is when we unite ourselves with God and ask God or Jesus and walk with them through it, relying on them. I don't see that we have to seek out suffering because it comes on its own period, different times in life.
Thank you. Let me introduce then the next one, which probably you know. Now, it's really important to hear this is not penal substitutionary atonement, because that's not how it started. This is called satisfaction. And this came with a guy called Anselm of Canterbury. And it's maybe helpful to remember that even when Martin Luther went to school, there were two doctors of the church. There was the theology doctorate and there was the legal doctorate. And they were in the same institution. So these are lawyering types. And Anselm was a lawyering type. And have a look. Anyone who commits sin is guilty of lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. Whoever keeps the whole law but fails at one point has become guilty of breaking the whole thing. The wages of sin is death. The free gift of God is eternal life. Whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. Psalm 51, I know my transgressions, my sin is ever before me. Against you, you alone have I sinned and done what's evil in your sight. I was born guilty, a sinner when my mother conceived me. These are the kinds of passages that were used to create this position. And again, from a standpoint of an attorney. And it becomes really important to point out, right, that you could read Psalm 51, you could read that as saying, look, there's the doctrine of original sin. Right there out of the Bible. Or you could say, I get that feeling. Thank God that feeling's not true. But there it is in Scripture, that feeling I've had. So we can either read Psalms as representing our feelings as poetry, or we can read them as statements about our ontology. Either way, I'm going to tell you, when David raped Bathsheba and killed her husband, he did evil against them. It wasn't just against the Lord. When you defraud your neighbor, you have sinned, in fact, against them and not just against the Lord. I think we get that. And that's why I'm predisposed to read Psalm 51 as a description of feeling. And our feelings are real, but it doesn't mean they're true. Here's what Anselm ended up doing. He said, look, people have tipped the scales through not living into the holiness that God intended. So his idea was not so much that like there's a naughty and a nice list. His idea was based on a culture of honor in that human beings have dishonored God. And when there's dishonor, well, you've got to make it up. And if you know anything about the sacrament of confession in the Roman Church, we call it reconciliation in the Episcopal Church, but it used to be confession. You have to have two things in order to be forgiven. You have to have contrition, and you have to do penance. If you know anything about indulgences, which caused the Reformations, the indulgences still required that you had to have contrition, but you could buy the penance. So to be forgiven, you've always had to have contrition. That is, you've had to be sorry. Augustine said, look, justice is justice is really clear. Penance does not mean punishment. It just means you do something to make up for what you've done, knowing you can never take it away. So because we've affronted God's honor, something has to happen to restore the scales. And humans can't do that. Like we're not, big enough to do that. So this is what happened, is that God created a way for us to satisfy God's honor. Now, the theory most Christians know is not this one. It's this one ratcheted up, that satisfaction happens with a demand of a life. Anselm didn't write that. So Anselm did not come up with penal substitutionary atonement. He came up with satisfaction. God's honor has to be satisfied. Now, you could find yourself thinking, well, isn't that the great thing about God, is that God's honor is so big that you don't have to make up for it. You could think that, but he did not. He thought something had to be done. One of his contemporaries strongly disagreed. And that guy was called Peter Abelard. And Peter Abelard came up in opposition directly to Anselm. You're noticing this is like 30 years later, but Anselm was still alive, right? Abelard came up with this idea called moral influence, which is the understanding that Jesus did not teach us how to die, he taught us how to live. So we should look to the life and teachings of Jesus, not to the death of Jesus. Or we look at the death of Jesus as a way of teaching us how we ought to treat one another. Like, here's what greater love means: laying down your life for your friends. May the Lord direct your hearts to the love of God. So Jesus taught us how to love bigger, and that was the point of Jesus. And the cross was Jesus loving us with his complete life. Abelard said, this wasn't God trying to fix any problem, except teaching us how to live fully. Abelard said that if you start, that really God wanted to change the hearts and minds of people. And there's no ransom to be paid to the devil, because the devil's a created being. The devil is not like in a battle against God, because God's the creator. God's not in a battle with anybody. There's nobody strong enough to challenge God. So all that ransom stuff is giving the devil too much power and too much identity. And this is 1,000 years old, this idea. Here's a quote directly from him. Love is increased by the faith which we have concerning Christ, because on account of the belief that God in Christ has united our human nature to himself, and by suffering in that same nature has demonstrated to us that supreme love of which Christ himself speaks. Greater love has no one than this. We are thus joined through his grace to him and our neighbor by an unbreakable bond of love. Therefore, our redemption through the suffering of Christ is that deeper love which in us, which not only frees us from slavery to sin, but secures for us the true liberty of the children of God, in order that we might do all things out of love rather than out of fear. Love for him who has shown us such grace that no greater can be found. This is consonant with the scripture last week: true love drives out all fear. So Abelard said, listen, if you really buy into satisfaction and ransom at the deep level, then you're going to be afraid of God. Don't be afraid of God. Follow a way of life and a way of love that Jesus embodied, and then you'll be free. Free of what? Not selfishness, that's not the right word, but free of fear.
That's not bad.
Well, most contemporary theologies are reiterations of this one, Tim. I think it's not bad. And you'll see that there's room later. Some people who redo this in the 20th century say, right, hey, it's the life of Jesus that's got the value, not the death. So let's live like the guy taught us instead of seeking to die.
It sounds Jewish, Mike, the point of the Torah to live your best life.
Yeah. And, you know, it actually, and you've heard me say this recently, to me, this is where I guess the thing I've been trying to say the last couple of months, because I'm trying to live into it. This is a theology of giving, really, is that Jesus he was not an investment to the world, he was a gift. And if you follow this really, really closely, right, then as a gift, human beings could do whatever they wanted. And human beings chose to mistreat the gift. And that's God the giver. God gave that gift into our hands no matter what we wanted to do with it. And the resurrection attests to the idea, right, that gifts like that, they never die.
And I like that. I think that is more in keeping with life with God than anything else. So I like this Abelard guy because he puts it focus on what's supposed to be focused on.
Well, I like him too, obviously. I do. But you know that one of the things that's helpful to say, right, is that the cross and redemption and atonement, these big, big words, are so deep and mysterious, right, that it's not like we can define them with just one image. And so I think if we tread lightly, and I think treading lightly is really important. Abelard would say, sure, in some ways, moral influence is about ransom. It's about going to any length you can to love somebody and deliver them. And you heard Bishop Andy talk about this last week, right? This was literally happening, that people were taking warring tribes were taking each other hostages so that they could get They could get ransoms. And so you ransomed your loved ones so that they could be free. You know, like, that's not such a bad image. It can be bad when you start taking it so literally, you forget to take it seriously. Abelard believed, along with John Wesley, that humans are perfectible. The Gospel of Matthew believes that, by the way. If you read it, Jesus says, I didn't come to change any of the Torah. I didn't come to undot an I or to uncross a T. That's a jot and a tittle. I didn't come to remove a jot or a tittle from the law. You keep the whole thing. Belief. Humans can do this. Now, you might be thinking, if you really bought into moral influence, then, I mean, is Jesus any really different from Gandhi or Martin Luther King or somebody like that? And the difference for Peter Abelard, I would say, is the story of the resurrection, which is to say that this kind of loving, though wounded, does not die.
And you know, we are resurrection people. And the emphasis, I think, instead of worrying about sin and suffering so much, is to focus on being a resurrection person, that because we have God's grace in abundance.
Mike, I have a question. Maybe you can speak to the correlation versus causation of this, but it seems like, I mean, I think there are a lot of beautiful thoughts behind the moral influence theology.
Yeah.
And, but I guess the idea of, you know, being able to make human beings perfect, that idea, I can just see how, though, at a certain point, it's like, okay, well, who's achieved it? Who do we look to in order to see who has successfully gone that route and come out the other side as perfect? Because I think, like you were saying about one of the other structures, you know, when we get into looking up to see like whose honor we need to satisfy, whose authority we should fall under, we tend to, I think just because of like classism and slavery all throughout the ancient and modern world, throughout all of history, we begin to look at the enslaved in whatever respect via, you know, either spiritual enslavement or literal enslavement as the people who need to be perfected versus their masters, and they're the ones who are perfect. And so it's, I think it's hard for me to see how a lot of these theories are not influenced by the idea of slavery in general. And I think it keeps us really tied to the idea of, you know, coming under a certain, like submitting to an authority in order to escape suffering, in order to perfect ourselves and honor our master. And I think that for me, it really lends itself to why so many people have an issue with seeing, like, you know, like why they really have an issue with just seeing like the police as a job and not an identity, why they so much want to support police and believe them when they say, hey, I was in a life-threatening situation, when, you know, and it's hard for them to really support things like Black Lives Matter. I mean, I see it as causation, you know, just that it's a running theme, but maybe like you could speak to that. I'm just, as I'm sitting here listening to all of these theologies, it seems like that idea or that system is something that has just literally affected every facet of our knowledge as human beings in the spiritual analysis.
Yeah, I think, Amber, I really appreciate that. And we're going to read a book in June that speaks to this really well from a Native American theology perspective. The goal of the Christian life is not transcendence, it's transformation. Transcendence is about climbing some hierarchical steps and becoming better and better and better. Mm-hmm. And I think here's the problem, is that the word perfect in the Bible actually is the word holy. And they're not actually quite synonyms. Perfect means flawless, and holiness actually just means set apart. set apart, like distinguishable. And this is where we use the word metaphysical. Meta means like above and beyond. So really perfect is just about being extraordinary. Now, I have to really define that some more, because you may say like, oh my God, I don't want to have to be extraordinary all the time. But extraordinary in the sense that we take Eucharistic bread, which is bread and wine, with the idea that it's also going to nourish our spirits in addition to our bodies. That's why it's extraordinary. Not because it's magical, but because it nourishes all of us. So, you know, like I happen to love this Jesuit definition of sainthood, that a saint is somebody completely familiar with the selfishness of their every motive.
That's a beautiful way to describe a saint.
Yeah, I mean, really, like perfection then is just like living comfortably in your own skin.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Amber, though, like that's hard for us because we want to say, well, geez, then like, what's the point if I'm okay and you're okay? And the truth is, very few of us are okay with who God has made us to be.
Well, I think we're rarely in full acceptance of who God has made us to be when we're causing other people to suffer. I don't know that they're necessarily the same thing. You know?
It's absolutely the case. I just read this book because I'm going to go on this pilgrimage, Camino de Santiago, and it's by Paulo Coelho. I don't know if you know who that is. He wrote The Alchemist. He writes these spiritual stories that are super interesting to me anyway, like, and they're very positive theologically. Like in The Alchemist, he says, you know, the universe conspires towards your meeting your personal destiny. And that may sound real new agey, but he uses like Christian language and Christian concepts. And I think it's real interesting. Anyway, I was just reading this book, The Pilgrimage, and there's an exercise in it that you're maybe not going to like, but I want to say what it is. This guy's on the road to try to, he thinks, transcend his order in a secret society, although he'll only succeed if he's transformed by being an ordinary person. That's sort of the riddle, which really fits in really well. And his guide along the way introduces him to this exercise he gets to do, which is called like the suffering exercise or the pain exercise. And anytime he has a thought in which he causes misery to himself, he's supposed to embody that physically by taking his pointer finger and pushing it against the cuticle of his thumb. That kind of hurts, by the way, right? So you're supposed to hold on to it in your body until you let it go in your head. And that may sound like a monk wicking themselves, but I think the point of the exercise is to realize the pain of your body, which you can feel, is representative of the pain you're doing to your soul when you hold on to these thoughts. Now, you don't have to do this method, right? But this includes when he looks at other people and he's like, I'm walking faster than they are on the pilgrimage. And that does pain to his soul because he's trying to transcend somebody else. So he pokes himself. And he says, like, the first couple of days, his thumb really, really, really hurts. And then he starts to do it less and less because he starts to realize these aren't just thoughts that come and go. They create pain for me and other people. And when I embody them, I pay more attention to the pain I'm causing myself. I'm not necessarily saying y'all should go out there and poke yourselves in the cuticles. I thought it was interesting, though, for him to say, like, a discipline is to embody the pain you're causing yourself anyway, so that you'll be aware that you're hurting yourself. I'm going to tell you a story. This is a Mother's Day story. I was recently visiting a parishioner, and as I'm wont to do, I like to try to be Superman and fill my schedule. So I've got 4 meetings a day. And that way I can say, look, I was really productive. So I was having this really lovely visit. And then I realized I had scheduled something else. And I said, I'm so sorry. I scheduled something else. This is me with no margins in my life, trying to be really productive. And the person said, I like that about you. What a gift Ellen Maston gave me. She said, why do you want to feel bad about that? I like that about you. And that thought, like, oh my God, look, I've done it again. That's a thought that causes me pain. And so the gift to me was, be who you are. Go ahead. That was extraordinary. That's the kind of perfection maybe that we're meant to do, right? Instead of saying, there I go again, I'm so whatever. Look where my core energy wants to go. What a gift to the world. Now, sometimes the world needs me to do something else with that energy, but how lovely that my core energy wants to accomplish things. That's a gift to the world. That takes a little bit of suffering because, you know, the suffering is I'm used to beating myself up over that. I'm really good at chastising myself. And to be honest, there are times when it's nice to have more margin, so I'm not just running off. But the goal of really trying to be out there and accomplish and be with lots and lots of folks, that's a gift to the world. I think this is a little bit about what perfection looks like, right? Is saying like, here's the intent. Here's where my core energy wants to go. And hey, it's not always appropriate, but where it wants to go is a good thing. Okay, I hope that this has not been a waste of your time. I've still got 4 more to go over with you next week. Those include penal substitutionary, Christus Victor, Atonement, and then a couple miscellaneous, including scapegoating. So we'll sign on for those next week. If you have questions or comments or like, oh, I hated that, please do something different, email that so I can be a good steward of your time and these kinds of thinking. And I hope that they also introduce ways not only to think, but to live, and that this is life-giving and helpful. Great to see you all, and I will see you next week, if not before.
Thank you, Mike.
Happy
Really helpful.
Thank you.